Hello again. To conclude Principles of Democratic Institutions 110, I will go over the study guide today for exam number 5 on chapters 13 and 14, 13 public policy, 14 foreign policy. We've talked about law and order, which is necessary before anything else can function for governments. Lighthouses, dams, highways, airport security, clean air are examples of public goods. We talked about market standards. That was that whole string of letters that I threw at you at the very beginning of the semester. And we come back to them in public policy. These are all things that all governments, irregardless of their ideology, are attempting to do or provide. Weights and measures, consistent specifications for quantities and qualities of goods, common terminology can be thought of as market standards. Without enforcement, contracts will not be valid, and you need to have enforceable contracts. That is the EC of the string of letters. By promoting business, investment, and consumer confidence, government affects investment, and that promotes competition and confidence that the economy is going to move forward positively. And signs of that usually are a robust construction industry, people buying homes. That usually signifies that people have faith in the future, and it's usually a sign of a strong economy. What is deterrence? It's a foreign policy term that is increasing armaments or the size of the military to prevent attacks. That came out of the Cold War. That was the arms race, the continual escalation by both the Soviet Union and the United States with all of their different weapon systems. If one side had 100 missiles, then the other side wanted to have 110. Oh, there's a gap, so now we have to increase our missiles, and so on. And eventually they had the triad of air, sea, and land weapons. And in all of these areas, the two superpowers competed in order to deter one another, creating the mad world, the mutual assured destruction world, mad world. And fortunately, none of those weapon systems were ever used. How does the government promote the creation of a labor force? By mandating universal and compulsory education until a certain age. Usually in the United States, you have to go to school until you're 16. Goods and services minus income from foreign investment is gross national product or gross domestic product. That's actually a better term. GDP is minus foreign investment. Overall, that's the old macro measure, GNP, and that did not subtract what multinationals are doing overseas, so it's not really an accurate measure. The farewell address was given by George Washington. It's important because it leads to the foreign policy idea of isolationism, which the Monroe Doctrine then stated, saying that monarchy was a threat to the United States. There will be no further colonization in the Western Hemisphere. Where colonies exist, okay, we're not going to interfere with them. And the teeth behind this in the 19th century was British naval power, because the United States did not have a deep water fleet until the very late 19th century, with the ascendancy of Theodore Roosevelt to the Secretary of War position, and he helped convince Congress to build this Great White Fleet that was finished by the time he got out of his presidency in 1909. Containment is also part of deterrence. That was the goal of the Cold War foreign policy of the United States, to stop the expansion of communism. Incentives that make people work are some of the reasons for limiting welfare. This was a big 1990s idea. They wanted to disincentivize welfare to prevent any more generations of people from collecting this benefit. Secondly, most welfare today is a function of the state level government. The federal level has largely gotten out of that benefit. Here is gross domestic product again. What group was real influential over foreign policy? The Jewish lobby. the book identifies as being very, very influential. Mode of transportation, was heavily influenced by the Interstate Highway Act during the Eisenhower administration. It continues today. The continual building of superhighways and multiple lane highways, high-speed highways that connect the United States by automobile of some kind. And with the passage of that act, that was really the beginning of the end of the railroad business in any sort of big shape. Rail today is largely used by East Coast residents from Baltimore to Boston in the megapolis. Buying securities to release more money into the economy is a monetary policy, and this is a favored tool of conservatives, as we've talked about. The Federal Reserve System is the central bank responsible for controlling credit, currency, and interest rates. Decreases in the availability of credit result from raising the federal funds rates or raising interest rates theoretically. The higher the rate, the less people are going to borrow because it costs more to pay that loan back. Whereas increases in the availability of credit result from lowering the rate. And that's what it's largely been in the 21st century. Interest rates have been flat or near zero for the last 15, 16 years. An executive agreement are legally binding arrangements between the U.S. and foreign countries. Are usually done by the president. It's a way to get around the Senate approval of formal agreements or treaties. This is legal. If the Congress doesn't like it, they can pass a law to countermand the executive agreement. The treaty process directly involves the Senate. They will either approve or disapprove. The Versailles Treaty ending World War I is the classic example of the Senate denying a treaty. It was largely negotiated by the Democratic President Wilson. He took almost no Republicans with him, and he refused to compromise on some of the issues that the Republican-controlled Senate had with the treaty, largely the United States membership in the League of Nations, which would abandon the historic policy of isolationism. Wilson was way ahead of his time. They did the United Nations at the end of World War II. The National Security Council has oversight on foreign policy. They have the ear of the president in the last 40 years, a great deal, much more than the cabinet does. Fiscal policy, taxing and spending. Remember those two words. Congress is involved in this, using tariffs or borrowing powers, creating work, all of the different alphabet soup agencies that came out of the New Deal. All of those are examples of using fiscal policy in order to stimulate the demand side. That's Keynesian economics, favors the tools of fiscal policy. An example of a regressive tax is the sales tax. It's regressive because the rate is the same, irregardless of ability to pay. A person who makes $100,000 a year will pay the same sales tax rate as a person paying 10%. What power does Congress possess over war? Constitutionally, Congress declares war. But that has changed because of the Cold War, and the president, because he is commander-in-chief, that is one of the hats that he wears, has come to dominate war-making more and more in the last 40 years. Economic and security are more important in foreign policy than humanitarian concerns. Humanitarian concerns are a distant third. Changing the federal funds rate is an example of monetary policy. The debt ceiling is the legal amount the federal government is allowed to borrow, and in this century it's continually been raised. There has not been a balanced budget. There hasn't been a deficit since 2001. They have not even come close to addressing the debt, the overall amount that the U.S. owes to the future. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, was a free trade agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. It was believed that eliminating tariff barriers and other impediments to the movement of goods and services was a way to stimulate the economy. It was very successful for some, but it was a death knell for unions. The World Trade Organization is an international organization that regulates trade between countries. In 2008, the Obama administration chose to keep forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they slowly pulled them out, the troop levels, during the course of his 2 administrations. The Cold War was never hot directly between the U.S. and the USSR. It was an ideological war between democratic capitalist systems and command economy communist systems. It was fought in different areas of the world by groups that aligned either with the East, the Soviets, or with the West, the United States. Vietnam was an example of a Cold War conflict. Preventive war is also called preemption. That is the G.W. Bush policy. Hit them before they hit you. And that came out of appeasement of the Europe of the 1930s, because they did not do anything to prevent Adolf Hitler and the Nazis from continuing to gain territory without lifting a finger to try to stop them. Mandatory spending entitlements like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, they're large and they're growing. The United States is an aging population, and it's going to get hit bad, Social Security, in about 5 or 6 years. Subsidies can be grants of cash or other commodities. Open market operations, as we said, through the buying or selling of securities, results in an increase or a decrease in the money supply. Buying, you decrease the money supply. Selling increases the amount of money available in the money supply. Make sure you study this guide. You'll have to come to class to take this. Make sure you pick up a Scantron form in the bookstore. They are 25 cents. Have some kind of pencil to use to mark your answers on the Scantron form. Do not write on the tests. Good luck, study hard, and do well.